You mentioned Citigroup. Actually, it's going to bring us to the next story I wanted to cover, and that is a bill that is coming up for vote in the House,
Yes.
which is HR 992, and it's horrible. Tell us what exactly is HR
So
992.
this, the technical term for it is I believe it is the Swaps Regulatory Improvement Act, and you always know, like, whatever the bill is called, like whatever the name of it is, it always does the opposite of whatever they say it does.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a bill that's about tearing down something that was put in place after the financial crisis. The first thing you need to know about this bill is that Citigroup wrote it. They wrote 70 out of 85 lines of this bill. Lawmakers changed two words that were singular and made them plural. That was our representative's addition to this. And this bill basically makes business cheaper for Citigroup on the backs of taxpayers. So after the financial crisis, we passed this giant law called Dodd-Frank. And one portion of Dodd-Frank was something called swaps pushout. And it's basically you don't get to hold your risky derivatives inside of the part of the bank with FDIC insurance because that's where grandma's checking account is and that's where businesses hold their money. And so you have to push it out into a separate part of the bank. And that way, if you do something crazy, that part of the bank can go down, but grandma's checking account is safe, and we don't mix up, the FDIC insurance part of the bank with this risky part. And so this bill basically says, you know what? No, let's not do that. That's not a good idea. And so it basically allows all of the risky derivatives to stay in that part of the bank with one really narrow exception. Something called a structured swap, and a regulator has to come in and say, this is a structured swap on a really risky thing. So for all intents and purposes, it's basically allowing all the derivatives to be in the same part of the bank. And that's a problem because basically in 2005 under Bush, they changed the bankruptcy law to basically make derivatives senior. And what that means is if a company goes bankrupt and you have like a pot of money and you have to divide it up somehow and people fight it out in court, anyone that has a derivative with the company that's gone bankrupt gets paid out first. And so
Wow.
basically this creates a risk that in the event of a bankruptcy, there won't be enough money left to pay everyone, and the people that have derivatives will get paid out first. And it's
So say for example, the next big crash that happens soon, which it's probably just a matter of time before the next giant Wall Street gamble destroys the world again. So the next big gamble, when the actual FDIC money that exists to federally insure all deposits, the first money that goes out would go to the derivatives themselves. That's what would happen.
That
then?
is, yes, potentially that could happen. The way that it works is there's something called the Deposit Insurance Fund that's actually
Mm-hmm.
paid by the banks, but it's paid by all the banks. So it's paid by the big banks. It's also paid by community banks. And in the event of something blowing up, you have to dip into that fund. And the way that this bankruptcy law works is it's possible that the derivatives counterparties would pull out of that fund first, and then there wouldn't be enough left in that fund to pay everyone else. So that's a problem. It's also a problem that community banks are having to basically back up these big banks that are doing these risky things. And then when that happens, the Treasury can give them a loan, but that's kind of like a bailout, right? Like the Treasury Department loaning a money to a bank that was gambling with risky derivatives. So there's 3 or 4 different things that are wrong with this, even after you take away the fact that Citigroup wrote it. And I always like to mention that why are we letting Citigroup write our laws? If you add up all of the government assistance that Citigroup got during and after the crisis, it's $500 billion. And so you would think that Congress would be like, you know what? I don't think this is a company that manages its business that well. We had to give them $500 billion. But no,
No.
it's yeah, sure, I guess. Oh, and one other thing about this is, so what this is about destroying, the thing that it's about gutting is this thing called swaps pushout. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley already do what Dodd-Frank is asking Citigroup to do. They already hold their derivatives in a separate part of the bank. And so this is really more about Citigroup being incompetent and needing to hold it in this part of the bank than anything else. So it's really just about subsidizing them in a way.
Well, I mean, again, it's not like Goldman Sachs are this great group of people who are doing wonderful things, and they're already doing this,
Right.
and so Citigroup wants to say, oh no, we want to make, and if that were to be repealed, do you think Goldman would actually go back to would go to doing it?
Yeah, they probably
Yeah.
would. I mean, the reason that Citigroup wants this is it has to do with credit rating. So, like, if I have a really low credit rating, it's more expensive for me if I want to borrow money because people think I'm unworthy and they think I won't pay my bills. And so the market basically gives a higher credit rating to the part of the bank with FDIC insurance because the market assumes there would be a bailout if there needed to be. Whereas this separate entity that they want them to push their derivatives to has a slightly lower credit rating. And so it's more expensive for them to borrow money out of the part of the bank without the FDIC insurance. And so this is really about Citigroup not wanting to have to pay a little bit more money when they borrow. And maybe that's important to them because they're so incompetent at running their business that little bit of extra money makes a difference. Whereas Goldman is like, whatever, it's fine. Like, we're good enough at making money. We're going to rip your face off. Like, it's cool. But I think you're right. Like, banks always want to make the most money as possible. So I do think that if they gutted this, Goldman and Morgan Stanley might stop doing that.